Well, hello guys. This is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl, back with another great video for you today. And in this video, I'm very excited to be continuing my read of this 1950s romance novel. Now, we are now in chapter, 22, I believe. And so this, I'm telling you, is getting really saucy. We've had some interesting developments in the last couple of chapters, and I just cannot believe what has been happening. There's just been so much going on in this book. And you think about it, for the 50s, this seems pretty racy, but there was a lot going on in the 50s. I think I say that every time I do these book readings, but it's so true because there's just an amount of stuff behind the scenes that, we don't think about when we think 50s. We think more conservatively, I think, but there was quite a lot of racy parties and so forth going on. So this is a fun book. Hi, Jennifer Miller. Thanks so much for joining in. I'm glad you are here. Welcome. I'll let a few more people trickle in, and then we'll get started on the reading. Now, there has been a lot, like I mentioned, so I'll catch everybody up to date a little bit with what's been going on. Now, if you missed any of the other chapters of this book, they are all up on my YouTube channel on the replay, so you can go watch them and get caught up with House of Flesh. This is by Bruno Fisher. This is a gold medal book from the 1950s. That's when it was published. And I talk about this quite a bit, but this was published by Fawcett Publications. This is a gold medal book. And gold medal books really did change the publishing industry. If you think about it, in the 40s, there were books, but mainly hardback books. There were a few soft cover books for soldiers, so they were more like pocket books for soldiers going off to war. And of course, there was a paper shortage too. So when you find books from the 40s, a lot of times there isn't a lot of margin on the outside of the pages because they were trying to conserve paper. So books were very expensive for people then in the 40s, and hardcover books were very out of most people's price range. But then you get into Fawcett Publications and gold medal, and they really changed books forever because they allowed paperback books to be produced and mass produced for the general public. So people really could get books that were paperback, and they were easier and cheaper, so they were available for everybody. On top of that, they changed the way the publishing industry was done and the contracting between the author and the publishing house, which really worked out in the author's favor in the end. So yay for gold medal books. They did a lot in the publishing industry. The other thing that's pretty cool is Fawcett invented the first spinning magazine rack. So that is really amazing. When you see those old-fashioned magazine racks, that was his invention. And they sold a lot of these smut books on those magazine racks, which is pretty cool. So I love that. Let's see who is in the chat here. My mouse just quit working, so let me get onto the keypad here. Karen Ferris is tuning in. Oh, you've been waiting for the next chapter. Well, tonight's special because we have a double hitter. So we've got two chapters tonight, which is very exciting. So you guys are going to find out what's going on, which is just fantastic. So I am so excited about that. And I'm sure that there is other things happening in these chapters that are going to be very shocking to us all. We have Linda Barnum coming in, so welcome, Linda. Thanks so much for tuning in. Dear Angela's Vintage is here. Welcome, Angela. Vintage loving nerd. Cheryl coming in from Canada. We've got Relevate Vintage. Welcome, Kate. Tim is here from Tia Fane, another Canadian. We've got Dana, Left Lane Finds. Welcome, Dina. And I think that's everybody in the chat. So welcome, folks. Thanks for tuning in. So if we're going to catch up a little bit on our story, we know that our main character, Harry Wilde, was just thrown in jail for attempted murder. Now, this is all taking place in Norset. And, of course, he was seeing Dr. Doane's wife. So Dr. Doane is the town veterinarian. And, well, he's just an odd character, to say the least. And then you have his wife, Mrs. Doane, who is very seductive but very quiet. And our main character, Harry Wilde, who's a basketball player from New York, has been sleeping around with her. And, of course, her husband found out. And so they got into a little bit of an altercation. There was a big fist fight. And then, of course, he found that Mrs. Doane just mysteriously disappeared. Now, remember, Dr. Doane's previous wife also mysteriously disappeared. And they recently think that they found her bones, and they think that he murdered her. So there's a lot happening. And then to top it all off, of course, Harry Wilde, who is staying at a house while he's in Norset in a bungalow. The people that he is staying with, the dad is a lawyer, and the son that's living there is a cop. So there's quite a bit of interest and intrigue in this book for us all. So we have to figure out what is going on with that. Yeah, seeing, yeah, it's more like sleeping around, and there's a lot of that in this book. There's a lot of sauce. And, don't forget about good old Polly Wellman, the general store girl. He was kind of seeing her too, but they weren't sleeping together. They just went out on a few dates, and I don't think that he really liked her. So Polly Wellman was kind of kicked to the curb. And then, of course, we've got his ex-wife, Harry Wilde's ex-wife, who has Maxine, who's the dog in the story, who's now was in the care of Dr. Doan. So lots of interesting characters. They always say those small towns can get pretty gossipy and interesting. And this small town of Norset has got some real characters in it for sure. So, thank you, Angela. Yes, Angela's the one that helped me find this brooch, so to speak. I got this from Mid-Century Maven over on Instagram. I love her account, and this is a 1950s brooch. I love the baguettes, little emeralds, and then it's got some Aurora Borealis. I just think it's fun with my green hat. So that's the brooch I've got on today. All right, so we're going to give folks a few more minutes to come in, and then we are going to get started on our chapter here. And of course, the replays are always up. So if you miss anything, you can go back. We are doing 2 chapters tonight. Now we are in chapter 22. So we'll be doing chapter 22 and chapter 23. And then we'll catch back up next week. And I might do a double reading too next week. So we'll see how that goes. I'll announce it over on Instagram. So I hope all of you guys are having a good day and excited for the reading. This has just been a fun book. I always love seeing what's in these 50s books because I think it expands our mind a little bit to what was going on in the 50s then. It's not as tame as we like to believe it is. Now, this book, compared to the previous one I read, Katie and Her Camera was very tame. There was a girl smoking pot, but this is a whole nother thing. Murder and sex and all kinds of wild adventures in this book. And Doo-Wop Bob, who couldn't make it tonight, but he's normally in the chat, he collects these gold medal books. He has read this book already because it's part of his collection. And he told me there is a big twist, but he is not spilling the beans, so you can't reach out to him over on Instagram and ask him. He has not even told me, so I don't know what has happened. I read each chapter week to week live, and so I prepare a little bit before the reading, but I don't know any more than you guys do from week to week, so I kind of like to do it live. Yeah, sex and lies in this book. That's right, Angela. Okay, folks, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our reading here. I'm going to take a little bit of water. I've really been loving these lemon zest waters. They're just really refreshing. They're kind of fun here in Florida when it gets so hot. Okay, so we are going to continue with our read. We are in chapter 22. This is House of Flesh, chapter 22, right now. In the morning, Mrs. Hickey visited me, bearing a card box not much less than a half her size. A few things I threw together, she said, and set the box down on the chair. I've heard of the swill they serve here. I untied the cord and raised the 4 flaps. The box contained a whole fried chicken, a home-baked apple pie, a shoebox full of home-baked chocolate chip cookies, half a salami, a couple of bags of potato chips, lots of candy, and a dozen cans of beer. The prisoner's last meal, I said. Snuffing nonsense. She dropped down on the cot and crossed her legs and shook a cigarette out of the pack her husband had brought me last night. Harry, what's the matter with you? What can be wrong? I have a roof over my head and a bed to sleep in and the prospect of a couple of good meals. Mrs. Hickey was not amused, and neither, for that matter, was I. Nobody tells me anything, not even my own son or husband, she complained. Parts of poor Alice Barton's skeleton found, and Bill and Conrad getting unreasonably scared when you disappeared for a few days, and scandalous going-ons in the bungalow right under my nose. And most of it I have to find out from the newspapers. She paused. So that was your mysterious visitor Sunday night. I must be getting slow-witted not to have guessed that it was bound to be a woman. The only difference between dogs and human in heat is that dogs are open and honest. They shut up poor Maxine, but nobody shut up that... Stop it! Mrs. Hickey uncrossed her legs and slouched back against the concrete wall. I suppose at my age I ought to know better than to make moral judgments. Sex, tell me, it's a trap. She flecked the ashes on the floor. And poor Polly Wellman, she's pretty and in love with you, and unmarried, but no, you had to go and get involved over your head with a... She halted at that, as if she had finished the sentence. I didn't say anything. Through cigarette smoke, she studied me. You know, Harry, you're a real gentleman. You don't tell me to mind my own business, because of my gray hair, no doubt. Her voice softened. But did you love Mrs. Doane very much? Yes. And now you don't care what happens to you. That's what I was driving at when I asked you what was the matter with you. I closed the flaps of the box and placed the box on the floor and then didn't sit down on the chair. Standing, I said, it's not quite that simple. I care and I don't care. At any rate, I'd just like to get out of here. Then why don't you want a lawyer? I see. Your husband's been talking to you. Well, it was about time, wasn't it? He says you don't trust him. She was a good woman, and I liked her. I didn't tell her what was really on my mind. I said instead, what's the good of having a lawyer if he believes you're guilty? What rot! You didn't do it. If you had, you would have gone to somebody else who would listen. Yes, I did it, and I'm glad I did. And I'd do it again because he murdered the woman I love, like a defiant small boy. I don't say that would be wise, but that's the way men are, and you particularly. Just because I told Jim Berwick, wait a minute, you spoke to the district attorney? I should say I did, just before I came down here. I stopped off at his office upstairs. Why, Jim's mother and I were friends before he was ever born. I told Jim, that poor boy is my nephew Dave's best basketball player, and Dave sent him to Norset for me to take care of, and that I intend to do, I said. If you weren't still wet behind the ears, you'd know that if he had done it, he would either have admitted it at once or have gone home and kept quiet about it. Bill thinks I tried to be smart. I know, that's what Jim Berwick told me too, she sniffed. Of all the nonsense, I said to Jim, what was so smart about Harry killing a man and then bringing back a policeman to find the body? I said, I can't think of anything more stupid. And with the marks of a fight all over him. And one thing you can say about Harry Wilde, I said, he's far from stupid, even if he is an athlete. That's what I told Jim Berwick. Maybe I wasn't so smart, I thought. But somebody was smart. Not too smart, just smart enough. Mrs. Hickey brushed loose her gray hair from her brow. If Jim has his way, he'll keep you here forever. You're very famous throughout the country. Without you, it would just be another small-town murder. He's getting worlds of publicity through you. And what else does a politician want? She lit a fresh cigarette. I wish I could get in touch with Dave, but the phone doesn't answer in his New York apartment. Well, what can a basketball player do for me in this spot? He might talk some sense into you. Conrad is a very good lawyer. I said nothing. She stood up and pulled down her skirt and put a hand on my arm. Would you want Conrad to send you another lawyer? He'll pick the very best. And work with him behind the scenes? I suppose. Her lips drew together. What have you got against Conrad? Nothing, I said. She had to tilt her head way back to look up at me. With both of us standing, she didn't reach much above my chest. Well, we'll get you out of here, she said crisply, whether you want it or not. Oh, I like it all right. She threw up her hands. I give up trying to understand you. I accompanied Mrs. Hickey to the door, as if I were a host showing out a favored guest. I thanked her for the food, and she hoped I would be free before it was necessary for her to bring back a fresh supply and left. I heard the vigorous clicking of her heels in the corridor ahead of the deputy's shamble. At lunchtime, I spurned the prison food for the contents of Mrs. Hickey's box. A beer opened and a glass were included. The beer was tepid, but it tasted better than I had ever had. I kept working on the beer, and between it and the cigarettes, half the afternoon ticked by. Then Gail swept into the cell. She paused just inside the cell, hatless and with her blonde hair tight, tall and lithe and delightful to the eye, in a pale blue linen suit. Her hands clung to an immense straw bag as she glanced distastefully about. The door banged behind her. Startled, she looked back at it. "Hello, Gail," I said. "Sorry you don't approve of the accommodations." "I don't either," she roused, saying. "Oh, you poor darling." She came to me and kissed me chastely on the mouth and stepped back. "You sure got yourself into a mess," she said sympathetically. "Well, that's a word for it. Don't tell me you made the trip just to visit me." "Well, not directly," she admitted. "I read about it in the papers. It's in all the New York papers. There are pictures of you in your basketball outfit." "I get it now. You came up for Maxine." "Well, I couldn't leave Max in a place with nobody to take care of him, could I? I borrowed a car from Myron May this morning and drove out here. Nobody was there, not even Max. So I called the police, and they told me that Max and those other dogs were taken by Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. I'm on my way to pick him up, but I thought it only right to stop off and see you." This was Wednesday. It was 3 weeks to the day and practically to the hour since she had brought Maxine to me. I had lived a life in those 3 weeks and died kind of a death. I said, "Don't you know I'm supposed to have killed your boyfriend?" "The papers say you didn't do it." "Well, I didn't. Anyway, he wasn't my boyfriend." "All right, merely a lover." Gail's jaw jutted. "Harry," she said angrily, and suddenly lost her poise. She looked down at the chair and hesitated, as if not sure if it would soil her skirt, and then she sat on it with the straw handbag on her knees. "Nothing like that happened, really, I promise." "Gail," I said, "you don't dislike me, do you?" "Why, what a thing to ask! I don't love you anymore, of course, but after what we've been to each other, I'm just fond of you." "All right, then. I'm in a mess, as you pointed out. I need all the help I can get. Will you help me?" "I don't see how I can." "Probably you can't, but every bit of knowledge might help. Now, what happened between you and Kenneth Doane when you drove him to New York City on Wednesday?" She chewed the orange lipstick on her lower lip. "You don't seem to believe a word I say," she complained. "I think you fell pretty hard for Doane." "Well, he was terribly attractive." "All right, and he attracted you all the way up to North Set." "Well, what if he did?" "Look, Gail, I'm not concerned with your morals. My own weren't so hot either. After all, his wife and I, well, you must have heard about that." "I most certainly did, and I can't imagine what you saw in her. She struck me as being cold and cloudy and not even pretty. I flatter myself, Harry, that once you had better taste." She had to be worked very carefully. I made myself dismiss Layla Doane with a shrug. "Well, nobody can deny that Kenneth Doane was about as handsome as they come. It was natural for you to fall for him." "But," her face clouded. "Harry, will it help if I tell you?" "It might." "Okay, then I will. Kenneth Doane told me his name when you took me swimming that day I brought Max. I couldn't get him out of my mind. I looked up his number and called him one day from New York. He thought I called because of Max. That was how I found out that he was boarding Max. You know what happened then. You were really clever, darling, but you were all wrong about what happened when we got to New York that night." "How was I wrong?" "It's not flattering to tell you this, but if it were help," she lowered her eyes like a shy virgin, "he wouldn't even come up to my apartment for a drink. He said he didn't drink. And I said we could have coffee, and he said he wouldn't sleep if he drank coffee that late. And do you know, we stood there in front of my building arguing. I've never, ever had to throw myself at a man. And I really didn't even throw myself at him. But I just couldn't get him to come up. Her mouth curled. That hick! Don't tell me he didn't know the score. Oh, he knew all right. That's why I said the story wasn't flattering. Darling, do I look all right to you? You look delicious, but there are just some men who are faithful to their wives. There's a laugh, she said. All the time his wife was playing around with you. No wonder when he found out. She stopped. Murder was a sensitive subject, and she didn't want to embarrass me. Do you know why he went to New York, I asked. Yeah, some kind of next day with other animal doctors. I wasn't interested. Gail's orange-tipped fingers tightened on the handbag. Imagine me standing in the street, practically begging a man, and then he wanted to shake hands when I left. I turned my back and marched right into that house. A woman scorned, I muttered. Her head lifted. What did you say? Oh, I appreciate you telling me all of this. But it doesn't help, does it? Well, I don't see how, but thanks anyway. Gail stood up. I still have to pick up Max, and then there's a good long drive. She arched against me, and we kissed goodbye. Darling, you know I wish you the best of luck. I know. And when she was gone, I opened another can of beer. All right, folks, that is it for this chapter. There's a lot, like Gail coming back. What's up with that? We haven't seen Gail in a hot minute. Yes, thank you, Dana. I appreciate that. Yes, I really do like theater, so this is kind of fun. So we've got Gail back now, which is interesting. And I don't know that she's really there for Maxine. And I don't know that I 100% believe her story, although I kind of do, because Dr. Doan is a weird, weird man. You know, when they got into that altercation, he just seemed to kind of like shut down. I don't know. It was bizarre. So I don't know what's going on with that. And I have a feeling I know why he doesn't trust Conrad Hickey, but we'll have to find that out in the next chapter. Yeah, I know. Pulled down her skirt and you thought, whoa, there's a lot of sex in this book, so that doesn't surprise me. All right, so chapter 23, we are going to start that right now. Later that afternoon, the district attorney sent for me. I sensed kind of a description in Berwick's bounding and prowling and jittering as he kept endlessly repeating himself. After 2 hours, I was returned to my cell where I finished everything in Miss Hickey's box except the candy and, well, 4 cans of beer. At 8 o'clock, I made the final trip up those 2 flights of stairs with the Morse deputy. Berwick, alone in his office, told me irritably that I could go home if I promised not to leave Norset. That was a fair price. I promised and went down to clean my belongings out of the cell. I gave the deputy the remaining candy and beer and also 5 packs of cigarettes. We shook hands. In the street, I found Bill Hickey waiting for me. He was out of uniform, and instead, in his police sedan, he was actually in a convertible at the curb. I heard you were being released, he explained. I figured you could use a ride home. Thanks. We drove through the twilight. It was Pa who talked to the DA into letting you go, you know, Bill said. You tried to brush Pa off, but he went to bat for you anyway. Should I get down on my knees and thank him then? He threw me a sharp sidelong glance. Why don't you like the old man? I do, but that's not the point, I said, and let it go at that. And so did Bill. After a science, he said, Pa told Jim Berwick to put up or shut up, charge you or release you. Berwick was in a spot. It was strictly a circumstantial case. Nothing more has been found to back it up. Even if he found an airtight evidence against you, the fact that you had a fist fight with Doan would be on your side. A smart lawyer like Pa could show you had plenty of reason to be scared of Doan and to fight him. He killed his first wife, and there was a second wife missing, and it's hard to prove that killing in the midst of a bloody fight like that was premeditated. And the most manslaughter. But Pa wouldn't let the DA get away with that either. He'd put you on the stand, and you'd say that in the middle of the fight, Doan tried to sock you with a crowbar, and you got it away from him and socked him instead. Open and shut up self-defense. And under the circumstances, the jury would believe you. Berwick needn't have worry, I said. I would have never pleaded self-defense. Likely, a straight non-guilty defense would also do it. There's no circumstantial case, no bloody clothes of yours or anything like that. And there you were, the one who phoned the police and told me all about the fight and took me to the Dome place. Could that be was being too smart? Too smart, you told me at the time. Yeah, but Ma was pretty shrewd about people, says. Yeah, I know. She says that if I were the killer, it wouldn't have been very smart of me, but stupid to take you there. And she doesn't think I'm stupid, and it's the nicest compliment I ever got. Did you know she went up and fed Jim Berwick that line herself? What a woman Ma is! That thing of jurors would have minds that run like hers. Could be a DA. This would be the first big case with lots of publicity. You're not any Joe Schmo. I didn't realize how famous you are, Harry, till I saw the fuss in the papers made over you after your arrest. Berwick wouldn't crawl out on a limb with what he had and all that was on the limelight with him, and he couldn't keep on holding you while he waited for something to break. In other words, I'm still where I was yesterday morning, chief and only suspect. Bill hunched his broad shoulders over the wheel. Berwick and the county police and state police will be working and digging and ready to pull you in at any moment. The only reason I can shoot off my mouth to you like this is I'm off the case. So I heard from your father. Without taking his gaze off the road, he said, Why don't you trust Pa? Is it because of me? Well, that could be it. He nodded grimly. I told you the other day that I'd get Doan in some way, but I meant finding enough legal evidence to convict him of Alice's murder. Did you think you could ever find such evidence? I said. I was gonna try damn hard. You figured that if I killed Doan and Pa found out or even suspected, he'd cover for me by throwing you to the wolves. Well, you don't know him. Perhaps I don't. Anyway, how could I have done it? Bill argued. How long was it between the time you left Doan and the time I picked you up at your bungalow? Well, that was less than 15 minutes. And how come I happened to get there just during those 15 minutes? Well, you were in the neighborhood. You picked me up at the bungalow a couple of minutes after I called the police headquarters. My God, he said, how far can confidence go? It was a long way in this case because Doan was murdered within that short period. Or maybe Doan wasn't the only one who watched my bungalow last night. Maybe somebody followed me to the Doan place and heard Layla tell me to come back the next morning. Whoever it was made certain plans. I'm getting a notion that there wasn't necessarily Doan who killed Layla. All the complication doesn't make it any more sense. I slumped over in the seat. I know. The only thing that makes sense is I'm guilty, so that's what everybody wants to believe. Well, I wouldn't say that. Ma and Pa don't believe it. Well, what about you? He shrugged. I'm off the case, so to hell with it. I don't suppose you're sorry he's dead. As he drove, his body made a taut line from hip to shoulder. I sure would have hated for him to get away with that murder of Alice. There was no more to be said. We drove in silence, and when he stopped the car at his house, Bill asked me to come in for a drink with himself and his folks. I said I was still full of beer and walked across the lawn to my bungalow. Nothing in the bungalow had changed since yesterday morning. The police who had searched it tidily closed the drawers and replaced the furniture. The bed remained unmade and the breakfast dishes were on the table. But somehow everything was different. The bungalow was lonelier than a prison cell. I built a fire and sat before the heat. The dancing flames put me to sleep. And during the night I awoke and undressed and then flopped into an empty bed. Well, guys, that is it. I'm starting to think that Mr. Hickey did it. Not Conrad Hickey, but Hickey Jr., the police officer. I think he's suspect. You know why? Because even though he said in those 15 minutes that it couldn't have happened, I think it could have. Because if you remember, Dr. Doan's house is only like 4 minutes away from the Hickey's bungalow. And if he was in the area and he already doesn't like Dr. Doan, He doesn't like him because he killed Alice. Now remember, the police officer had a love for Alice and they were going to get married, and then Dr. Doan stole her away and then she went missing. So there's something to that that's just really fishy. Now, yes, Gail might be involved because Gail's also suspicious a little bit. Like she and Harry, they fought through this entire story. They don't really like each other all that well. So I don't know. We'll see. So next week we will continue our read of House of Flesh. We will be in chapter, let's see, we did chapter 23 today. There's 27 chapters total in this book. And so let's see, chapter 24 next week. And let's see, that's a pretty long Ooh, that's a long chapter, a longer chapter. And then we have chapter 25, which is a shorter chapter. So maybe I'll do 2 chapters next week. And then we have 26, and I think there's just 27, or is there 28? Yeah, so then I could do, there is 28. Well, then I could do 2 and 2 and then 1, or maybe 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and then 3. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, we'll be done with this book soon, and then I will pick another book for us to read, which I think is really fun. I have quite a stockpiling, so I will kind of consult with Bob a little bit, Bob from the chats, who collects these books, because he knows the stories really well, and he might know which one is going to be really, really good. So I'll ask him. But I think that's fun. Well, thank you, Green Bee Explorer. I appreciate that. Yes, Gail was by Dr. Doan. Yep. So I don't know, Tim. That's interesting. Gail could be there. That could be the twist, is that Gail did it, or that the police officer did it. I don't know, but I really don't think Harry had anything to do with it. I think Harry was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong town, in love with the wrong person. So that's what I think. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. There's a couple of other sales going on. It is 8:32, so there's still plenty of time to jump on over to Alex's sale, Chapter 2 Vintage Co. And I don't know what else is going on for the evening. Friday, Flippin' and Sippin' will be back with Fatbird Finds at 10 p.m., so that's always exciting. And then don't forget, on Saturday evening, Pam's sale is on at 8 p.m. Eastern, so Pamela Blanchard. And then Johnny G's Vinyl Treasure Show will return. I keep missing it. The last couple of Saturdays, I've been kind of MIA from the chat, but I do always catch the replay. I love all the 50s and 60s original vinyl Johnny has that he plays from his own personal collections, a lot of rarities and some great requests from the audience. So tune into that. If you love vintage music, you love a small chat. There's only about 20 of us there that love vintage music. It's all 50s and 60s. It's on Saturday night at 10 p.m. So tune into that. And that will do it for me tonight. So I'll catch you around in the other chats on YouTube and on Instagram before my next video at vintage_and_vinyl. And I hope, as always, folks, that you will stay in, stay safe, and bend YouTube. Bye-bye, friends.